Following the decommitment of Demetrius Samuel, has the mass exodus of the Florida Gators recruiting class began?
You are Locked On Gators, your daily podcast on the Florida Gators. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Locked On Gators, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On Gators your first listen of the day every day. We are available daily and free wherever you listen to the podcast and on YouTube. Happy Tuesday. I'm Brandon Olsen. Find me on Twitter at WNS_Brandon. Today's episode of Locked On Gators is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. And Demetrius Samuel flipped to Syracuse, or more appropriately, Demetrius Samuel flipped back to Syracuse because he was initially a Syracuse 2026 commit. Committed to Florida, reclassified, committed back to Syracuse now. And obviously, this wasn't the first overall decommit of the class, but this is the first of the what will likely be a mass exodus of these recruiting classes for 2025 and 2026. It just, of course, when the coaches are likely getting fired, things tend to happen. And before we even talk about other kids that might decommit, before we talk about the importance of replacing Billy Napier now, there's a few things that I want to get out there regarding these decommitments or potential decommitments, whatever you want to call them. First, it is important to remember that at the end of the day, these are kids, okay? These are kids making a very grown-up decision that a lot of people will never be able to fully relate to. And I know, of course, a lot of us went to college and decided where we'd go to college, and that was an important decision. But your path is kind of after college. Figure out what opportunities are available, figure out what's there for us. That's not so much the case with kids coming to Florida or any other Power 4 program. They're going to where they think will get them to the NFL. That's an important distinction there. So that's one. Two, this is just a full-blown business now, okay? It's a talent acquisition business, but this is a full-blown business, okay? Kids commit to places, and we know some kids commit in order to keep their spot. We had, I can't remember his name, the defensive tackle from Florida, Orlando, that committed to Ohio State. And he was like, hey, I'm committed to Ohio State to secure my spot. Jarquez Carter. He's like, I'm committed to Ohio State to secure my spot. But if Florida turns things around, I might flip. I'm still open to it, but I've got my spot secured at Ohio State. And so kids do that, and they should. I want to make that abundantly clear. These next 2 points are, I think, the most important when we're talking about these decommits just throughout the entire process. Because, again, I want to make it clear. I know people are going to get mad about things. Get mad at Florida. Get mad at the coaching staff. And kids that go about things respectfully, I don't think there's any reason to be upset. And I know this. This is one of the main things that I wanted to talk about, where as much as we want to say this kid committed to Florida, as much as we want to say this kid committed to the logo, this kid committed to the school, to the program, whatever it may be, the University of Florida is recruiting future NFL players, right? This is the SEC. A lot of the program, we'll say the top 2/3 of the SEC, you're expected to have NFL players on your roster throughout your roster, right? So ideally, the kids that Florida is recruiting are here to get to the NFL. So these kids have NFL aspirations and are committing to the coach that they feel will get them there. It's why receivers are so quick to commit to Ohio State with Brian Hartline. It's why DBs love committing to Nick Saban. Things like that. Why quarterbacks go to Lincoln Riley. Things like that. Okay? So as nice as it would be to say, oh, they committed to the school, it's 2024. When you're talking about an SEC program, you're committing to the coach that can get you to the NFL. That's really what's happening, okay? And that's not a bad thing. I know that a lot of people get mad about so he committed to a coach and not the school. He committed to, yeah, because that's what he should be doing. Or she, if we're talking about women's basketball or any other sport where they can go pro. You're committing to the person that will get you there. And honestly, it's always been like that. There's some guys who it's like, yo, like I was going to Florida for any chance I got to go to Florida, I'm going to Florida. There's kids like that, absolutely. But think of it as these kids are going to the coach that is going to get them places. And that's also not something that I think is reasonable, which this is where the fanatic part of things come into play, where if Florida takes a receiver coach from Alabama, every receiver that's committed to Alabama, Florida fans are going to go, oh, you bring them over. Like bring them on. They committed to you. Bring them with you kind of thing, right? I understand that that's a big part of the college football aspect or the fanatic aspect is going, well, I like it when it helps my school, but I want you to be committed to my school, not to a coach. But if you're committed to a coach at a different school and he comes to my school, then I want you to commit to my school and follow the coach you committed to. I understand that. It's just something I do think is important to acknowledge here. I will also say this, and this is maybe the most important, but simultaneously least talked about part of this dynamic of the recruit and the program. Okay. And I will say that I'm not naming names, of course, with anybody, but I will say this. I got hired, 3.5 years ago. I got my first day was, I believe, April 1st, 2021 was my first show with Locked On, or specifically Locked On Gators. I did guest spots before that. But April 1st is the day I took over Locked On Gators officially. Contract was like mid-March, whatever. But since I've taken over this show, I've spoken to recruits, as in I've personally spoken to recruits, and I've personally spoken to the parents of recruits who have committed to Florida and ended up going to Florida, who have committed to Florida and decommitted from Florida, who were being recruited by Florida and committed elsewhere and then ended up flipping to Florida. It's been 3.5 years that I've been covering this program, 3.5 years that I've been covering recruiting, okay? One of the things that gets brought up, and I don't think people acknowledge enough, as in fans, I don't think they acknowledge it enough, is that when a coach gets fired, or when a coach is going to get fired, these kids either straight up decommit and reopen their recruitment, or remain committed to Florida and reopen their recruitment, okay? And I want to, obviously everybody knows that, right? But part of the reason is they don't know that this next coach is going to offer them or honor the commitment that they have to the school. Like, these kids need to open things up so that they're not left standing there without an offer and without a home, right? Demetrius Samuel decommitted, so we'll use him as the example. Demetrius Samuel decommitted from Florida. Let's say, I don't care, Coach A gets hired to replace Billy Napier, right? Coach A gets hired. Let's say Demetrius Samuel had never decommitted. He's still a Gator, right? Coach A gets hired, does not reaffirm the offer, does not re-offer, and does not honor the offer or honor the commitment. Now Demetrius Samuel is left scrambling to figure out what his spot's going to be long-term. No, kids are reopening recruitment. Kids are reopening everything. Demetrius Samuel just flipped back to Syracuse because he was bought in on Fran Brown. He was bought in on Syracuse. Florida flipped him. And then when Florida struggled, Syracuse still looked good. He went back to his initial commitment. Okay. There's going to be kids who their only commitment has been to Florida, and they're going to decommit or reopen their recruitment, even if they stay committed. I do think you can say that the kids who stay committed are kids that committed to a school more so than other kids. But realistically, this is also about these kids making sure that they're protected. These kids making sure that they have a home, that they have a place to stay, that they have a place to play, that they have a place to develop. It's important to acknowledge that because let me tell you, Florida Gators fans, it's going to get bumpy, okay? I am expecting a lot of decommits because you should expect that. It's what happens when coaches leave, right? Especially in today's day and age. Okay? Last time Florida went through this coaching change, NIL wasn't such a big factor, right? There have been things for decades under the table, behind closed doors, whatever you want to say. There still is, by the way. But these are still things where kids now need to protect themselves better and need to protect themselves more. And so I want to make it clear that this is while you can sit here and I can sit here and I can go, damn, that kid decommitted. It's also important to acknowledge that that kid might not be able to commit to you as a university without knowing who the next head coach is, without knowing these things. And we'll talk more about that later. Florida, I am expecting more decommits for the 2025 and 2026 class. We'll talk about those next on Locked On Gators. It's time to highlight my Roy Player of the Week. Roy is a new platform that lets fans make contributions directly to their favorite athletes. Download Roy for iOS or Android and enter referral code Locked On, and you'll automatically be entered into a sweepstakes to win $5,000 cash. No purchase necessary, void where prohibited. This week, by the way, I'm going to say we here because from this weekend on, the Locked On Gators insiders, which the links in the description below, will help decide who is going to be this player, the Roy Player of the Week. Okay, this week Florida didn't play, so I picked Ryan Williams, Alabama. I mean, first off, beat Georgia, and he was a huge part of it. Had one of the sickest catch and runs that I've ever seen. I mean, if you saw his Instagram profile picture change after the game, you know he's a dog. I'm giving $100 to Roy, or I'm giving $100 to Ryan Williams on Roy. Okay, I'm sure if you were as impressed with his performance as I was, you can show him some love too. Yeah, I know that you're a Florida Gators fan, most likely if you're listening to this. You can still go to Roy, donate to any player, give money to any player, and help build your program, really, right? Get off the sidelines and into the NIL game with Roy. Thanks for making Locked On Gators your first listen of the day. Every day we are available daily and free wherever in the podcast and on YouTube. And I just wanted to take a little bit to talk about some of the decommits. And again, this is something where I don't fault recruits when they decommit. In fact, I feel like I have more sympathy for recruits when they decommit from a coach that isn't on the hot seat. You know, when a kid or when a coach is on the hot seat and we can kind of writings on the wall like it is with Billy Napier, it's really tough for me to fault a kid for decommitting, right? Again, because they need to worry about their long-term future. They need to worry about multiple things. So I have a bit of a difficult time faulting them too much. Based on things I've heard or things I'm reading the tea leaves on, I think there are some very likely decommits. First off, wide receiver Joshua Moore. It's a bit of a Florida battle for him. One of the most highly sought after targets at receiver right now. And I will say this as well. Miami is probably going to clean house this year recruiting unless they have a complete crumble or unless Florida or Florida State have big bounce backs for the remainder of the season. Miami's probably going to clean house. They look good. They're winning games. Tough to fault them, right? And they have money. So, yeah, hard to fault them there. Joshua Moore wouldn't shock me if he wound up there. Again, big-bodied target, great playmaker, love his style. A highly sought-after receiver. not surprising that he would want to go. Especially, let's be realistic here. There is a possibility. I don't think it happens right now at the moment. I don't think it's going to happen, but there is a possibility, a very real possibility, that DJ Lagway hits the transfer portal. If you're a receiver and DJ Lagway was a big reason for you committing to a place, why would you remain committed if you're not confident he's going to be there? So there's that. Okay. Honestly, the rest of the guys are on the defensive side of the ball. I think that the running backs will have offers, obviously. I think that a lot of kids, I think the tight ends will have offers. Tayshaun Gelsey was a climber. Absolutely. But I think that when we're talking about pure flight risk, these are the top 5, right? So Joshua Moore is number 1. Number 2, defensive lineman Joseph Mbachu. Okay. Joseph Mbachu is, of course, the defensive lineman that played soccer. And then this is his first year playing high school football. When Florida offered him and when he committed to Florida, it was very much a, what is that edition? It was hated by a lot of fans, and a lot of fans dunked on it. I did a live show, and a lot of fans dunked on that. Like, why are you doing a live show for this unranked kid that no one's ever heard of and all this fun stuff? And what happened in the following days? Do you remember? Does anybody remember what happened in the following days after Joseph Mbachu committed to the Florida Gators? I'll take you through a quick little timeline. He's a defensive lineman out of Grayson, Georgia, or that's his high school that he's playing at. But you look at what happened with Joseph Mbachu and his recruitment. We have a visit on July 27th and a commitment on July 31st of this year. Okay. And at this time, Joseph Mbachu was an unranked defensive lineman. Okay. That's July 31st. On August 1st, an offer from South Carolina. On August 13th, an offer from Auburn. And you look at those and you say, okay, well, those are other SEC programs, but they're mid to lower tier, right? Then you look at what happened the rest of the month of August. You had August 14th, Texas offers. August 26th, Georgia offers. August 28th, Alabama offers. August 28th, USC offers. August 29th, Tennessee offers. August 29th, LSU offers. September 14th, visits Texas. He's set to visit Florida again later this season. I believe he's there for the LSU game. He's slated to go. But this is a rising kid that had, again, very little hype around him and then blew up after he committed to Florida. And part of the reason that he committed to Florida, I believe, is because they were one of the first schools to offer him, right? Or the first school in the SEC to offer him. He's picked up a ton of offers since that commitment. Wouldn't surprise me if he was going to flip, because why wouldn't you take a Texas offer with Sark and a good coaching staff when the alternatives are Florida with question mark at head coach? I get it. It's not surprising. He's a riser. It's what happens. Defensive lineman Jeremiah McLeod. It's an interesting one. I think I've said that I think he's a pretty good player. I think he's got a lot of potential as a pass rusher on the interior. I think he can fit in at that at the big end spot that Florida has. But I don't know if he'll be here. He visited Florida State after the Florida loss to Miami, which, granted, since then, Florida State has really fallen off. At the time, Florida State was 0-1 with a close loss to Georgia Tech. And I was like, okay, well, they looked ugly, but it was the Ireland game. Things can change. Understandable. Since then, obviously, they look bad as well. So I'm not sure what Jeremiah McLeod's going to do, if he's intent on one of those two schools or whatever it may be. But I think that he's in a spot right now where he's visited another program during the fall before the, Billy Napier is going to get fired stuff really popped off. It makes sense to me that that's a sign that the kid's not fully committed to the program, right? Which, again, I don't fault kids for. I understand there's people that will fault kids. I think that I have, I don't even know what to call it, but very, I guess, is progressive the word? I don't know. Very progressive thoughts when it comes to recruitment. Like I've said with the legacies, I think there's a lot of legacies that won't even consider their legacy program that much, or really, because they want to start their own legacy. You know, they want to carve their own dynasty out. They want to carve their own destiny, their own name, their own everything. So, and again, I think that that's just a more modern thing with God, this is gonna sound so boomer, with kids these days. So I don't fault kids for that. Speaking of legacies, Ben Hanks Jr. Ben Hanks Jr. committed to Florida when a lot of people thought, hey, maybe it would be Miami. There was Louisville, I believe, was also in that final three. Came down to the wire, committed to Florida. Visited Miami this past weekend, which was a nuts game to be at. I can only imagine. Like, can you imagine the vibe that was when just that full last drive, really, and all the insane plays that Cam Ward made that were just like, what the hell is happening? College Football 25 is the most realistic video game around. I'd imagine that when you're between two programs, or even three, two of them are in the same conference. One of the teams that you're being recruited by is looking like the king of that conference. The team you're committed to likely going to have a coaching change. Easy to see where the flip would come in. And the last one that we're going to talk about is a 2026 kid in cornerback Jalen Waters. A hell of a player. I've talked about it before. I think he's a fantastic cornerback. I really hope that he will come back to Florida, but he has recently scheduled a bunch of visits this fall. Feel like that's a pretty good indicator for where he's at with the program right now. And again, these kids don't know if they're getting that offer back. These kids don't know these. And I know obviously we can sit there and say, hey, obviously they're going to get another offer. It's not obvious. Okay. Things are not obvious with how they work out. And to make that assumption is kind of, honestly, kind of dumb. But Jalen Waters has scheduled visits to, I believe it's Ohio State, Miami, LSU, maybe Oregon was the other one. I'm pretty sure there's a fourth one in there. But yeah, this is all kids are starting to keep their options open. But I do think that kids that have been proactive in keeping their options open are obviously the more likely ones to flip, regardless of what may happen with the Florida Gators coaching staff and search, which is important and relevant. We'll talk about that next on Locked On Gators. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, I gotta know. You're halfway into the first quarter and you go, you know what? Tyreek Hill touchdown. You can do that. You can do that on FanDuel, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Thanks for Locked On Gators, your first listen of the day. Every day we are available daily and free breakfast in the podcast and on YouTube. And like I said, the Florida Gators coaching staff status is going to lead to this instability in the recruiting class. And it should. Again, because I understand the recruiting class. Again, I understand going, oh, but the kid committed to the program. Not really so much. That's not what happens in 2024. And I'm not trying to be a jerk about it. I'm not trying to be a jerk about anything. And I've also had people leave comments that go, well, what if recruits watch this? What if recruits' parents watch this? If you are a recruit or if you are a recruit's parent, you can contact me and we can talk. It's happened before when people watch my show and they've brought it up to me. They've brought it up to me. They DM me on Twitter. They hit me up in the YouTube comments and tell me to reach out to them, whatever it may be. Okay? It's happened. It's going to continue happening. That's fine. My take on it for people that go, oh, well, what if recruits or recruits' parents watch this and don't come to Florida because of it? If you do not have a personal conversation with me, I can't see why my opinion would hold enough to you to convince you of anything. We'll say that. I will also say that if a kid's taking the advice of someone that they haven't spoken to personally, it's probably a bad indicator there. But I will circle back to this point. Okay. I think that the decommit of Demetrius Samuel and the impending decommits coming up, I don't even know why I said impending, the future decommits that are coming, okay? They're coming. Brace yourself. I think it just puts further emphasis on the point of you need to fire Billy Napier expeditiously, if not sooner. Okay? If you know what song that's from, bonus points to you, by the way. Just saying, bonus points. If you get that reference, bonus points for you. But you need to fire Billy Napier expeditiously, if not sooner, and get started on finding his replacement. I know that Florida Gators fans, you're going to talk about, or we are going to talk about Lane Kiffin, Lincoln Riley, Dan Lanning, Lance Leopold, all the L's, James Franklin, Alex Golesh, who else gets brought up with it? Chris Peterson, I've seen get brought up. Cliff Kingsbury, I've seen get brought up. A bunch of coaches, right? Here's the thing. All those coaches obviously have different situations. Cliff is in the NFL. Lane is still expected to make a playoff game despite the recent loss to Kentucky. You can have that silently agreed upon and tell recruits, hey, this is going to be the guy. We saw it with Will Harris, right? Will Harris was finishing the season with the Chargers, but so many recruits knew it was going to be Will Harris already. They were told because like recruits specifically in the secondary were told, hey, it's going to be Will Harris. It's not that you don't have a secondary coach. We just haven't announced it yet. It's going to be Will Harris. You can do that with, hey, head coach is going to be Coach A. All right? Don't say anything yet. Keep it hush, but just so you know for your thoughts, for your planning, for your recruitment, for your commitment, this is going to be the coach. He reaffirms the offer to you. I understand that those aren't things that you're supposed to do. Here's my point on that for everybody going, oh, you can't do that. There's a lot of things you can't do that people still do. Who would have thought college athletics is a messy business? I don't know, but you need to get started on that replacement, right? Especially if you go, hey, we'll reaffirm the let's who's a kid that we talked about last segment. Jeremiah McLeod. Okay. Jeremiah McLeod decommits, commits to Florida State, who's also not having a great year, right? But it's his number 2 team right now. So commits to Florida State. Coach A gets hired, and Coach A goes, hey, I'll reaffirm the commitment. If you want to commit to us, come here. Yeah, I know you had to get your spot with Florida State. I know you had to get locked in before other kids come in and fill the class up, and you lose a spot. But if you want to come back, we'll take you. Or if a kid is still committed to Florida and is taking visits elsewhere, you can go, hey, you have not decommitted. I understand you took visits. I get that. We reaffirm the offer. We still want you here. This is our plan for the defense and the secondary. This is our plan for the defense and the defensive line. This is our plan for the offense and the receiver room. This is our plan for these things, okay? This is who's going to be your position coach. This is who's going to be your coordinator. This is how it's going to work out. If you want to stay with Florida, stay with Florida. We'll gladly take you. If you don't, then you don't. We respect it. But the offer's still here. You know why you got to do that? You know why you got to kind of take the rocks out your socks, take the rocks out your pockets, whatever you want to call it, and get moving? Early signing day this year starts December 4th, 3 weeks earlier than usual. Okay? You don't have time to lollygag after the season. You might have a 6-day window from the end of the season to early signing day. You got to lock in some decisions here. That's why I think it's smart to fire Billy Napier as soon as possible, just so you can get started officially on that coaching search. So you can get started officially on saying, hey, we'll still recruit you. Like Christian Robinson is a name to remember, obviously, for Florida Gators fans, who, when he was at Florida and he was getting fired, or the coaching staff got fired and he was likely out, he was still positively recruiting Florida. He was recruiting for Florida, and he was like, hey, if I'm brought back, I'm going to show out, right? There's a lot of guys who I think would still recruit for the program. There's some coaches right now who, believe it or not, there's some coaches who are currently on staff and still not recruiting. There are certain coaches, hear me out, certain coaches who have stopped recruiting because they know they're going to get fired. And it's not just one, by the way. I want to make that one abundantly clear. It's not just one coach that has basically phoned it in because he knows he's getting fired. Crazy how that works. But they still have jobs for now. This entire coaching staff still has jobs for now. And if you're Florida, maybe those coaches shouldn't have jobs so that you can get started on a replacement coaching search hire, and so you can get started on trying to salvage this 2025 class and 2026 class that quickly look like they're falling apart. Yeah, you've got some work to do as a university, which I know upper administration is sitting on their thumbs, maybe literally, so they don't have to do their jobs. Get on it, please, and thank you. I want to win some damn football games. Thanks for making Locked On Gators your first listen of the day every day. We are available daily and free reviews in the podcast and on YouTube for Locked On Gators. I'm Brandon Olsen. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at WNS_Brandon, and I will see you all next time.